I'd like to first say thank you all for having me here today. As it was mentioned, I'm the business line manager for V-Ray for Revit. Basically, that means I'm the product manager for V-Ray for Revit, so I'm the guy you blame when you're not happy with the product, or the guy that you talk to when you have feedback for us. So thanks again for having me. So what I'd like to do is just quickly talk a little bit about V-Ray and Chaos Group and our AEC focus, architecture, engineering, and construction focus, and how we've looked across our product lines from V-Ray for Sketchup, V-Ray for Rhino, all the way up to V-Ray for Max, and have decided, look, there are easier ways that we can get these tools in the hands of designers, and we can make better tools for visualization specialists. And we've really refocused our attention on doing that, and over the course of this year we have some really exciting things to show you. So what I'd like to cover today is just some simple workflows, some tools to help you visualize quickly, and these are designed from the designer level all the way up through visualization specialist. And I would like to mention that we really are introducing V-Ray for designers, not just visualization specialists. So I'll start in a typical design scenario. We're going to be looking at something like early pre-design or schematic design, and generally you would use either SketchUp or Rhino. I think we've talked to hundreds of firms all over the world, and typically this is the workflow for them. So I'm just going to point out Rhino and some of the tools in V-Ray for Rhino, the upcoming beta, which should be here very, very soon, and imminent release, which will be this year. But basically, we've taken a step back. We've redesigned the interface in V-Ray for Rhino to make it easy to bring the tools that you need front and center. We've also looked at things like common workflows, things that people need right away. And so you'll notice that we have materials here, but we also support lighting and geometry and settings for your renderings, all of that in this new simplified user interface. And this will be unified across, eventually across all three of the products. Right now, immediately, it will be unified across V-Ray for SketchUp, which also has a beta coming out this week, and V-Ray for Rhino. So we're all using the new V-Ray 3.4 core. If you're not familiar with it, we've really paid a lot of attention to a feature set and our speed and accuracy across the board. We're much faster than we've been traditionally. We've got tool sets that work with the way that you work. This is a model actually that one of our internal 3D artists is doing as part of the QA test for virtual reality, which we'll touch on here in just a moment. But this is designed in Rhino using Grasshopper, which is a pretty typical workflow these days to populate the seats inside of this stadium. And then, of course, we've done what's called a model in white, which allows us to see the form, really focus on the structure and what we've built as far as the geometry. And this is a typical part of the workflow, and we suggest people learn, do model in white to understand what's happening with your lighting and your form. And it's a great thing in some cases even to show your client when you're in early pre-design and maybe even early schematic design. One quick VR output, and this is, again, unified across Rhino and SketchUp. And the idea here is that VR shouldn't be difficult. Anybody should be able to do VR. And so we're taking the camera that you have native inside of your scene, and we're doing a stereo pano. In this case, you're looking at a 12:1 image, technically two left channel, right channel, 6:1 images side by side. In the future, we'll have the ability to have these stacked for you, but this will go directly into like a Gear VR or an Oculus VR. With very little effort, you can take this content directly into most VR devices today. We've also got strategic partners with groups like Iris VR, who will take these things and implement them directly into applications for Google Cardboard or so on and so forth. So the next thing I want to talk about is kind of what happens at design development and even into CDs as you're continuing to visualize your project. Again, what's important to note here is that we're looking at the way that designers would interact with V-Ray as part of the workflow to help them make material choices, to help them understand spatial relationships, to do early VR analysis when they don't have a lot of time to invest in doing visualization or crowding the vision specialist's door with, hey, I need you to render 5 images so I can understand what's happening with this space. This really frees them up to focus on crafting better images that go directly into your marketing materials while allowing you to design and get valuable rendering feedback as you go along. So what we've done with V-Ray for Revit is really do a true integration into the interface of Revit. And we've got our standard production renders as well as RT, just like the rest of our verticals do. We've got quality settings now, so it's as easy as choosing if you want a draft level, medium level, all the way up through final production level quality rendering. Easy resolution that's familiar if you're familiar with the Revit interface. Artificial lights and artificial light support. Basically what we do is we take any light inside of Revit other than the sunlight, and we convert it into an IES light, so they are physically correct lights. And that's what we render at render time. We do have V-Ray Sun support. In addition to V-Ray Sun, we also support dome light, so if you like to light your scenes with HDR imagery or EXR imagery, we do support that, as well as color-based dome lighting. So that's built in out of the box. The V-Ray Sun, just to point it out, is connected to the same mechanism that controls the environment inside of V-Ray. So if you change your time of day and your shadows and all of your views change, we change with that. And the idea here really is that we want to be non-destructive to the BIM, so all of those settings that are in Revit by default are going to remain in there, but yet you can still get some good quality renderings out very, very quickly with very little effort. And again, you can open up the beta of V-Ray for Revit. We're in 2015, Revit 2015, Revit 2016, Revit 2017 now, in any one of those products. And within a couple of button clicks, you are rendering. And it's fast feedback. It gives you an idea very, very quickly of what material choices you've made. And I'll step back and talk about materials here in just a moment. But we've also had to answer, how can I make better use of the computers that reside across my company? And whether you have a 5-person firm or a 5,000-person firm, it doesn't really matter. We've introduced what we believe is a revolutionary take on distributed rendering, and we're calling it V-Ray Swarm. And the idea here is that it's an elastic renderer that automatically takes the job when you enable distributed rendering. It's a one checkbox. This is in V-Ray for Revit directly right now, and is in the current beta. You check the enable distributed rendering box. It takes a 10-second refresh, and then enables on all of the render nodes that you have set up, anything that you install Swarm on, it enables the CPUs for usage. Now, as those machines become unavailable, for instance, someone starts working on the machine and the processes aren't available, that machine will automatically drop in and out. But you can also scale how much of your total compute resources you're using. And I'm excited to say that this works not only with CPU, but it works with GPU as well. So if you have GPU-specific boxes, we've got an ad hoc mode for Swarm that you can run in that will allow you to do RT GPU across the board as well. So that's really exciting and really opens the doors for RT CPU, GPU, as well as production rendering on CPU. You can monitor all of your computer resources from the simple web interface on anything that has Swarm. And opening any one of them allows you to manage all of them, which is a great new tool. So we've made this easy for IT admins. We've made this easy for people who don't know IT but want to set up a distributed rendering network. It's very, very easy for you to do today. You can also monitor your resource usage, which is what you're seeing in the background there. You can see how many cores are available, how they're being used, what your memory consumption is, network, so on and so forth. So this is an exciting new technology for us. We're anxiously awaiting your feedback on this. If you download the latest beta of V-Ray for Revit, we'd love to hear what you see and what you think. If it fits your needs for doing quick renderings, even at large scale, it's great at doing that. We do material overrides in Revit as well. We have support for universal material override for both opaque materials as well as transparent materials or translucent materials. And you can do a single override for those. We actually shipped with diagrammatic materials with the product, so you can go in and pick this exact same material, which is a basswood material that you can use. And we chose these materials because they're familiar materials to architects and designers who build physical models. We also have one in there that looks like a starch model for 3D printing, so on and so forth. So you get some the ability to go in and quickly do a model in light, quickly understand light, form, space. You're looking at a project zone model here. So we do support a great deal of geometry as well. Linked models aren't an issue with V-Ray for Revit. We bring all that information across. In addition to that, we take the standard Autodesk materials that are already assigned inside of your BIM, and we do a translation at render time. So there's no need for you to change anything in your workflow if you want to change a material or you want to add a material. You would do that in the same way that you would always do that in Revit. And at render time, we'll do an override. Of course, we give you the ability to go in and manually override individual materials if you choose to do so. But we'll do a real-time translation at render time otherwise. We have depth of field effects, which is what you're seeing in the center panel here. That's built in, and you can set depth of field very quickly and very easily. And again, you don't need to be a visualization specialist to do this, and get dramatic images very quickly that you can quickly show to your colleagues, your constituents, to help you get design decisions made, which is, after all, what we're really trying to do here. Finally, I'd like to speak a bit about 3D Studio Max, and this gets to predominantly our visualization specialists, and we're continuing to work across the board with digital specialists and with designers alike, and facilitate ways that they can better work with each other. So we're excited. I'm going to call out a few quick tools inside of the new 3.4 core, and if you haven't updated to the latest 3.4 core, we certainly suggest that you do. Many new tools in there, great speed reduction, or great speed enhancement, excuse me, across the board, better results faster, and new tools like the V-Ray denoiser, which allows you to take an otherwise noisy scene and very quickly clean it up. This is great at taking something like a draft level rendering and making it something closer to a medium level rendering. If you need to do a quick study and get quick output, it's also very, very good and works actually with video output as well. So if you're doing multi-frame output, we have support for that in the standalone V-Ray denoiser that ships with V-Ray for 3D Studio Max, 3ds Max, excuse me. We also have aerial perspective, and again, these tools, everything that you see in terms of these tools in Max are currently in V-Ray for Revit, V-Ray for Rhino, and V-Ray for Sketchup beta, because they all share the same common core. Aerial perspective gives you kind of an environment, a bit of environment fog, if you will. It also allows you to, it changes the color as an atmosphere would. Atmosphere fog is what I should say. And so the atmosphere that you would see in a scene, whether it's a city scene, in this case we're showing you a country scene, trees, mountain, and you can see, you know, a bit of haze, if you will, over the hills in the background. That's all done through aerial perspective, and again is available through all of our product line. And of course, the multitude of speed enhancements, the lighting and material assets that you know. We've made workflows inside of 3D Studio Max that make getting up and running an AEC workflow is very, very simple. And those things that you know and love from V-Ray for 3D Studio Max are still in there and working quite well. Depth of field effects, VR for 3D Studio Max. We've got VR cameras in there that give you much more flexibility than you would get in design programs like Revit and SketchUp and Rhino, and allow you to do more with what you have. And also, we're now supporting Max 2017 with the latest Builder 3.4 core. So one more bit that I'd like to touch on here. In the last few moments, Chris Nichols out of our LA office and several of our top-tier thinkers inside of the company have produced what they're calling Chaos Group Laboratories, and some of you are familiar with this, but I'd like to introduce it for those who are not. And Annalisa will get you links to all of the things that I'm going to show you, but it's future technologies and making future technologies accessible to people who may not have the time to do the research but need to understand very quickly how to get up and running in things like VR. And so to that note, we've produced the guide to VR, which is now out, has been out for a bit. If you've seen us at any of the shows, we're distributing this. You can also go onto the site and download a free copy of this that you can register for right there. It's very quick, very easy to get to. It's a comprehensive guide, so it talks about the science behind VR. It talks about our history with VR. It points out, not only our program, but some of the other programs out there that might enable you to get this into the hardware and do hardware comparisons across the board. So we're choosing to remain agnostic to devices right now, and I think that's important because it allows you to pick the device that's right for you and the device that's right for your client. And at the same time, we're showing you what you need to know to get up and running in a quick and easy way to something that could otherwise be relatively complicated. This is a new edition and one that we just released, and this is the guide to GPU. For those who aren't familiar with using GPU for processing, it's substantially faster than CPU in some cases. And you'll notice this in RT GPU, and in fact is being used in VFX substantially today. We're using it across the board and across the spectrum in a broad range of rendering types, and I think this is a great introduction for designers to kind of understand a very complicated thing in a very simple way with our new guide to GPU. And again, this is a free guide that you can go to our lab site, log in, register, download this very, very quickly, and read through it and understand a bit more about GPU. So this is the live demo portion of the presentation. You'll have to forgive me if things go awry here. It's the problem with beta software, but I think we're in pretty good shape. A couple things I'd like to talk about, just walk through in the V-Ray for Revit demo in case you're not familiar with the product, is why we've done the integration the way we have, and talk just a little bit about some of the tools in here that we think are going to be really powerful for you in doing renderings of your own. So one of the things I'll call out right away is, of course, the first question I get is, well, if I go to a camera view inside of Revit, I notice that the toolbar grays out. This is a limitation of the API. We've been working very closely with the Revit development team to overcome this. I will add that, even Autodesk themselves have this own issue within their own platform. So when you're in camera views, it's just a limitation of the API in Revit right now that we can't really get any information out of the cameras themselves. And so to overcome that issue, going to a non-camera view, it can still be a 3D view. You do have the ability to render from here. Oftentimes what happens is people will tile their windows so that they can have both up at the same time and do their renderings from there. But we do have the ability to pick your view directly from here, and you can filter views, so you can start to type in the type of view that you're looking for, the name of the view that you're looking for, and that will show up there. In terms of our renderer, we also have something called Project Gallery now. And the idea behind Project Gallery is that we're saving all of the renderings that you do, whether they're completed renderings or not. And this allows you to go back in after you do your renderings, and we're doing these by view. So as you render each of your views, they're going to save a certain amount of images. Of course, you have the ability to clean those all out and to adjust how many that you see at once. But this also allows you to save those images to disk after the fact. So unlike our standard frame buffer that you're familiar with saving out of in the past, now you have the ability to save these out even well after rendering. And then you've also got the ability to save it to your project. So if you choose to save it to your project, it will appear under your renderings here so that you can use it inside of your sheets. And we feel that this is a beneficial thing to designers and architects across the board in telling their stories, and it's a nice kind of place that you can go and see what did I render, what worked, what didn't, very quickly and easily. And inevitably you're going to find yourself in that situation where you've done 5 renderings and the first one you thought looked better than the last one, and so you want to roll back. Well, your history is here, and that's all a part of our project gallery. We're continuing to expand this as the product continues to develop, and I'd love to hear your feedback and the caller's feedback on what we have implemented here and what they'd like to see here. I talked a bit about the quality settings, draft, low, medium, high, and very high, but what I didn't show you is what we're doing behind the scenes. Of course, anyone who's familiar with V-Ray for 3D Max or V-Ray for Maya knows how complicated the setups can be, and getting your global illumination engines right and your image samplers right. And you could go to school for years to learn light theory and really fully understand the math and science that goes behind creating beautiful renderings quickly. And what we've done is we've hidden a lot of that stuff under the hood. You do still have some access to it under global settings, though, so you can come in and choose, the brute force option, light cache, radiance maps across the board. But we've also taken the feedback from VFX specialists, almost 20 years of rendering for the top level films, AAA game titles, architecture and engineering and construction firms across the globe. We've taken that and 3D artists, around the world. We've taken that feedback and we've implemented the science and math under the hood so that you don't have to worry about it, so that you can open it up and very quickly, very easily get to the type of result that you would expect to get to. We've also implemented our new progressive renderer in V-Ray for Revit, as well as Sketchup and Rhino. So if you're not familiar with the progressive renderer, it gets good quickly and continues to refine over time. So the longer you let it render, the better the quality gets over time. So even though draft is set at progressive right now, you could change it to buckets if you want. It takes a little longer to render, but it gives you, over the life of the rendering itself, gives you faster results to an end, if you will. Progressive renderer, though, will get infinitely better over time. So take a look at those, and of course we document all of this very, very well in our docs page on docs.chaosgroup.com across all of the platforms, not just V-Ray for Revit, but I thought I'd show you that. Our RT engine settings in here for GPU or CPU, you can select between those two. And then we also have volume aerial perspective, which is the slide that I showed you a bit ago in Max. So you can come in and set those. The units that you see here match the units that you have set in your project. I'm using the sample project that ships with Revit. So it's millimeters metric by default in this case. You have ability to make adjustments here. Also environment fog, so if you want to see God rays, as they're called, coming into your space, you really want to highlight the light that's happening in your space. Environment fog is the tool that you'll use to do that. And again, you can read all about that inside of our docs page. I want to take a moment also to talk about camera settings and exposure values and give you a few little tips and tricks here that can help you regardless of the platform that you're using. For those that aren't Viz specialists, typically your exterior exposure values you want to default at about 14. And interiors you want to default at about somewhere between 5 and 7. We've had good results at 6 and 7 for interiors. So if you're doing an interior scene that has a lot of curtain wall on one face and you've got daylight coming in and you notice that your interior lights don't seem to be rendering, well, that's because actually, to be physically correct, you should be using like an exposure value of 6, which is going to make all of that curtain wall just glow bright white, which is the reality if you were using a physical camera on site. So the trick or the workaround to that would be to set your exposure value at 6 or 7 so that your interior lights show in the way that you think they should. And then come into the V-Ray sun setting itself and set that at like a 0.01 or a 0.02 in terms of intensity. And so we're faking the light in this case, but that's allowing you to render both daylight and interior light at the same time. Of course, if you turn the lights off for doing quick studies, you just want to see interior lights, you can use the no light option, which is going to shut daylighting off completely, but will allow you to see your artificial lights or your interior lights across the board. So that's a useful tool for understanding what's happening with your interior lights. And often what we find in Revit families is that the light element itself is buried inside of the geometry. So you may find yourself in a position where you actually have the light family to pull that light element down and outside of the geometry so it'll actually show up in your scene. Regardless of the rendering engine that you're using, that's a tip that will serve you well. Dome lights I'll touch on here really quickly. By default, we use colors, but you can also click to use an HDR image. We ship with one that you can use. And what we're doing is we're using the pixel values of the image itself to light your scene. So this is a quick and easy way to kind of get an idea for what your scene might look like in a very real way. If you go out and shoot an HDR image or do a panoramic image of your particular site that you're working on, you can load that in as the actual lighting values for the model that you're proposing for that site. It sounds more complicated than the reality is. It's actually quite easy to do this today, and you can be using physically correct lighting directly from HDR imagery. Of course, you can set rotation, so if you decide that the sun isn't showing up exactly where it's supposed to, you can play with rotation values here to get it to point to where you want and need it to point to. Really quickly, I'm just going to log into a live machine on our network, and hopefully you all can see this. This is actually the V-Ray log, so we've had this Render Pro up and running for a bit now. But just to show you a bit about what's happening, it defaults to the log base, but allows you to see the resource usage in real time. So right now we're not doing anything on this computer. You can tell the CPUs are not active. On this particular computer, we don't have a GPU, so there's no real graphics processor on it, which is why you're not seeing that. But you can see memory allocation, what's available, what's being used. You can see network allocation, and of course we have disk resource usage. So if you're sending large scenes to multiple computers, you can see on a computer-by-computer basis what's happening there. Yeah, this will be out with V-Ray for Rhino and V-Ray for Sketchup. This will ship as the new distributed rendering model for those products as well. At least that's what's currently in the plan. And one of the nice things about this is you can see I can enable or disable very, very quickly computers on the fly. And by enabling them, they'll go out, it'll turn them on and make them available for rendering. And I'll just go ahead and disable that so I'm not using network resources while I'm projecting here. One thing I'd also like to call out, and anyone who's worked with DR will really appreciate that, or really appreciate this, is that V-Ray versions, as you know, different products sometimes will update at different times. And what we've done with Swarm is we've made it so that it will automatically download the version from the appropriate version from whatever product is sending it. So if you're sending from V-Ray for Rhino and you've got an updated version of the V-Ray standalone, it automatically submits that. So it's automatically updating your distributed rendering nodes for you. You don't have to worry about doing that manually anymore. You install it one time on the machine and then you do the updates that are necessary. And you can actually on the fly turn the nodes on or off, or switch the versions between multiple versions here inside of the user interface as well. We have some minor configurations, so you do have the ability to come in and choose specific license servers to point to. and environment variables for the people who really like to get into specific platform related things. And we're continuing to evolve the software itself. So there's lots there, and again, this will be shipping across all of the spectrum of softwares. Of course, anything that you see here in the log also pops up in Revit. So if I go back to Revit, I'll just show you that really quickly. And hopefully I don't lose you here. If I kick off a quick render, I shouldn't. I'm going to go ahead and stop this render just so I can show you that enable distributed rendering dialog here. We've got a little button right here. Let me see if I can stop this. And this little button will actually launch that web page that I showed you. It'll launch one of the nodes that you see inside of the license server itself, or the VREX form itself. And from here, going into network and clicking on any one of these nodes will actually launch the management console for that particular node. So from one place, you can actually launch individual nodes to manage them and bring them up and down. And in fact, you can see someone just brought their laptop online, and we haven't sent a job to it yet, so it doesn't have a current V-Ray version, but once a job gets submitted to it, it will automatically get the V-Ray version that it needs. Lighting settings currently are based on the physical lighting, at least in V-Ray for Revit, they're based on the physical lighting that you have inside of your scene. However, we do have some post-production tools built into the V-Ray frame buffer, so if you're familiar with these post-production tools, like granular exposure, things of that nature, you can actually adjust your exposure on the fly, and I don't know how much of this you can see because it's a preset thing, but you can save these globals out. So any settings that you do here, white balance, hue, saturation, levels, etc., you can save those settings out and load them on a per scene basis. In addition to that, inside of the settings themselves in V-Ray for Revit, we do have the ability to, let me see if I can shut this down without crashing. It's a little difficult because I'm in GoToWebinar, so I apologize for that. Inside of the settings itself, we have the ability to make some adjustment there and save settings on a per project basis. So if I do a bunch of material overrides to VR mats, or I make specific changes to my settings, I can save those and apply those across the project to multiple computers. And that, again, that's going to be available in settings. So again, I apologize that you're seeing me crash here. It's a problem with beta software and doing GoToWebinars is that sometimes things don't perform quite like you think they should. But the settings are there and they can be loaded per view, certainly. Yeah, just one last reminder here for everyone. All of the features that we pointed out earlier, for instance, the V-Ray denoiser, this is a separate render channel. For those who are familiar with render channels, it's a separate render channel available inside of V-Ray for Revit. It will be in V-Ray for Sketchup, V-Ray for Rhino as well. So you can run the denoiser as well as your standard RGB paths, and in Photoshop you can composite those to get granular adjustment of your scene. So you can render an otherwise noisy scene, especially things that have lots of glass, lots of metals, big city scenes that tend to have noise, and interior scenes with low lighting tend to produce a lot of noise. The V-Ray denoiser is really going to be the product or the feature that you're going to want to use regardless of whether or not you're in 3D Studio Max or Revit, because it allows you to quickly take that noise and filter it out and get a much cleaner image much faster that you can actually put in front of a client without having to go through all the extra steps of going to 3D Max or doing, you know, a very expensive rendering in terms of time to make sure that it's noise-free. This allows you to get that very quickly and very easily. And aerial perspective, I showed you inside of the V-Ray for Revit interface, we do have aerial perspective in there. You can get these same results. In 3D views where you've got city, aerial perspective is a fantastic way to kind of highlight the focus of your building and have the outlier building show a little bit of a little bit of atmosphere, a little bit of fog, a little bit of humidity, which is the reality of what you would see in your scenes, and you can use this to great effect very easily directly inside of the verticals, Rhino and Sketchup and Revit, as well as 3D Max, where you get a little more flexibility in Max than you do in the other verticals. At least we've got this unified throughout the channels.